Would you believe that there actually is one silver bullet that will fix any relationship issue? Really, one silver bullet, one thing that you can be doing that actually is at the root of all things that fix relationships with issues. Do you believe me? Well, if you want to learn a little bit more about this, keep listening. Welcome back, everybody. March. I am so excited about the next 4 podcasts. This series is going to blow your minds. I promise you. And you know, that question that I asked you up front, do you really believe that there could be this one silver bullet that would fix any relationship issue that you could ever imagine? I'm going to be answering that today for you. And I promise you, there really is one underpinning of all the tools that you need in relationships. There is one that solidly underpins all the others. And when you have that in place, you can transcend most relationship issues. And if you stop being able to transcend a relationship issue, it may be because this underpinning is not in place, right? Okay, so we'll get into that in just a minute. But because I am doing this series, I'm just going to remind you, if you haven't listened to the previous podcast, please go on back and take a listen. So we're talking about midlife mastery, and I'm going to be sharing in the next 4 weeks 5 different areas that are the most common areas that women struggle with in midlife. If you do a little Google search, you're going to probably come up with these 5 things. In the next 4 weeks, I'm going to be talking about those, but I also am going to be giving you solutions. I'm also going to be talking to you about how do I remedy this, right? And even more than that, I am offering all month long a 30-minute assessment for free, a one-to-one coaching assessment with me. So it's both coaching and assessment, where I can tell you within 30 minutes whether or not you're headed for a midlife crisis, and if you are headed down that way, where you are vulnerable, and even give you some tools in your toolkit so that you can get past or move around this midlife crisis in the making instead of heading straight into it. Right? Okay. So if you want to do that, go to the notes for the podcast and click on the link to meet with me and set up that one-on-one appointment. So the one-on-one appointment with Dr. Natalie, getting your assessment and your coaching, link is in the notes for this podcast today. And honestly, I would, if you're not driving, if you're listening to this podcast in any other way, I'd like stop it right here, go to the notes, click on that link, and come and meet with me, because you would be really surprised what it is that I can figure out by assessing these different areas, these 5 different areas. And more than that, I'm going to be assessing some areas that are resiliency factors that I'm going to be talking about through the next 4 weeks as well. Those are the things that are kind of the antidote to whatever the problem is that we'll be, or topic area that we'll be talking about. And that is really what I can give you some insight into, is where your vulnerabilities and strengths are and what kind of tools in addition you might want in your toolbox going into midlife. Okay. But no further ado, let's get into this podcast. So the topic today is obviously relationships. Okay. And for women in midlife, relationships definitely is like, it comes up number one most of the time as the place where there's the most rub. And it makes sense when you dissect it a little bit. I mean, in midlife, women are really in the middle. They're centered. And so there's people older than them, people younger than them, but they're kind of the Wednesday of the week, right? So in the middle, you're probably still raising children, but you're also taking care of aging parents. And relationships and how you show up in relationships is changing remarkably. So for instance, while your relationship with your parent, that mostly was a relational relationship. What I mean by that is like you were just loved by them, attached to them, but they weren't giving you anything. You weren't being raised by them anymore. That actually is changing into what we would call a transactional relationship, where you are taking care of them, because as they age, they're going to need more of that kind of care. So it's moving from relational to transactional. Whereas the relationships with younger generations, so your kids, even if they're getting older and moving out of the house and becoming college children, I mean, all of that aging early on is moving them from transactional, where you were doing everything for them, right? Babies need us to do everything. 18-year-olds need us to back off and need to fall on their face if they need to learn what they need to do. And sometimes that's even our 25 and 30-year-old children, right? So that relationship with your younger generation is trying to move from transactional to relational. And all the bumps that are coming up are usually because you're throwing old transactional behavior at your children instead of showing up with them relationally. I know this sounds kind of weird, but let me just put this all in perspective with a story, of course, because I think that this particular story really saliently kind of grasps what I'm getting at here. So just recently, I went to a children's play with my daughter and some friends of ours. And at the play, we were at a school that I hadn't ever been to, but a little outside of our community, but within driving distance. It wasn't like it was far away, but it wasn't a community I would have normally been familiar with. And I saw a couple, and I couldn't quite place them, but I just knew that I had to know them. I'm like you're going through the mental Rolodex, which let me just tell you, in midlife, there was, first of all, I've known a lot of people. And sometimes when I see people in person, how I know them is they might have been clients of mine in a therapy sense. So I shouldn't be letting anybody know that I know them. So I'm not talking to my, the friends that we're with, like, do you know those people? Because I don't want to let that cat out of that bag, right? So I'm going through my own mental Rolodex, just noodling on this. And it all of a sudden hit me that this was a couple that I sat next to on basketball benches for an entire traveling basketball season that my son had in the 5th grade. Now, my son is a freshman in college, so this was a long time ago. And in particular, here's even more fascinating. My daughter is 8, or just recently turned 8. So I was pregnant for almost this entire basketball year, except for right at the end when I had her. And I think she came maybe to the last few basketball games, but not very many. And then most of this particular traveling team also kind of played together all through the summer, just to continue to practice so that they could try out for the traveling basketball team the next year. And it just so happens in 6th grade that my son moved into a different traveling basketball team. So he didn't play with these folks anymore. And so really, I have not seen these people in almost 9 years, because I was pregnant during most of this traveling basketball season, which feels like it lasts forever, but I bet it lasts like 5 months, maybe 6. And like I said, it might have extended into the summer a little bit. So it might have been a little bit longer than that. But I'm like, I finally put it together. I'm like, yes, I know this. And so I turned to the people that I'm with and I said, I know those folks. I can't remember their names, but I guarantee you they are the parents of one of the kids that was on this basketball team with my now college-age child when those 2 children were in the 5th grade. And the person I'm with kind of peripherally knows these folks. Okay. So she looks at me and she's like, that can't be, because they have like middle schoolers and some early high schoolers, but I don't think they have any kids that are older than that. And I'm like, I guarantee you they have a child that's at least 18 years old. I guarantee you. I mean, he might have been a young one in his class, but he's somewhere around that 18-year-old mark, because he must have graduated high school last year and be in college or college age at this point, So she's bold, my friend, and she just walked up to these people and she's like, well, my friend here My friend here thinks that she knows you from 8, 9 years ago when your kids were on a basketball team together. And the couple kind of looks at me and then they look at her and they're like, I can't place her. But yes, we do have a son that's a freshman in college and did play traveling basketball for his entire career. So it's totally possible. We just can't place your face. And I started to talk to the couple, like hoping, like, hey, I said, well, first of all, I was, here's my 8-year-old, but she was in my belly because I was pregnant for most of this season. And my son only played on the team with your son for one season in the 5th grade. Yep. Didn't jog their memory, didn't jog their memory. Then I was, at this point, I was starting to feel like, really? You didn't really? Okay. So back up a little bit. In my son's life, most of the time I was a single parent. Now, in the 5th grade year, I would have been with my second husband. But truth be told, the persons that came to those games were usually me and sometimes his stepdad. So we would be there every single game, and you had to get them to these games, right? Like there rarely, if ever, did I ask anybody else to drive my kid. I mean, I think there might have been a time, but really, honestly, most of the time I was there. I had a butt on the seat. And as my butt got bigger, because I was pregnant, people would give up their seats because sometimes you're just like in these folding chairs along the side of a little elementary school gym, barely your foot is like touching the out of bounds line. It's just like right there. So I know that I was there for almost every single game. I honestly would believe that it's every single game. I can't think of a game that I missed, honestly. So like I'm getting a little irritated with this couple because I'm like, yeah. And I'm like, it's, my son. And he was like, he played the point guard and kind of the backup point guard. And sometimes he'd play a wing. And I think your son was like one of the taller ones on the team. And so he usually was post or, but they sometimes, I think they even play together. Like they were one of the 5 that played in their like team B when, the first starters came back in. And this couple is just like looking at me like I'm crazy, but they glommed on to his name, my son's name. And they're like, I remember him. And then they start like like you can see their mental Rolodex going and they're like, yeah, his dad always came to the games. Yeah, I think it was his dad. Well, I don't know. His dad always was there or some guy was always there. I know that we sat next to his dad a lot, but I guess I never saw you. Maybe you were not very many games. Oh my God. Like the bottom dropped out. And I was so shocked. I honestly, that's all I can say is I was so shocked that they didn't realize that I had schlepped this child around pregnant as hell. Another little backstory on this is the driver's side door of my Mazda 6 had broken about 4 months into that pregnancy. And so I was climbing in and out of the passenger side of my Mazda 6 for the entire pregnancy. Honestly, because I still drove that car past having my daughter. So I'm like, how in the hell do you not know that it was me that was always there? Like I was always, always, always there. And I was a little miffed. Like as the more I started to think about it, I mean, I was shocked with them, but I like left and I'm like, how is that possible? How is it possible? This couple doesn't remember me when I was at literally every game. How is that even possible? Right? I think once I had to give them a check because son's dad didn't give them a check for something that we were doing, t-shirts or something. And I didn't know. And I physically remember writing a check and giving it to them. And again, we know this was 9 years ago because I physically wrote a check, but that's aside. So wow, I was like, how is this even possible? How is it possible that nobody would remember me when I literally was always the one that was schlepping my child around? It's one of my joys. It's one of my best memories actually is being able to be at those events for my kid. And it just flabbergasted me that these people didn't remember who I was. So what does that have to do with today, Dr. Natalie? Well, here's what I know to be true about myself 9 years ago. I was a consummate people pleaser. I'm still kind of a recovering people pleaser. I'm doing my best here, but not unlike many women, and certainly many women in midlife, I realized I was a people pleaser. Like I was yes, yes, yes to all the things. Yes, I'll take the kids here. Yes, I'll pick up that extra client. Yes, I'll, make sure that the church has this. Yes, I'll make sure to, bring goodies to the next basketball game for the kids. Yes, yes, yes. People pleaser all the time, didn't have anything to say but what people wanted to say. And I really revolved around being that kind of a chameleon. Like if you caught me at work versus in the community, I might look very different because I was people pleasing around the people I was with. And by design, here's what people pleasers do. People pleasers are the way they are because they are deathly just avoidant at all costs of any kind of conflict. And they feel like things are conflict when they're nothing, when it's just like an uncomfortable, you have a little bit of something, something in your tooth and you need to take it out. Like that's conflict. Oh my God, I couldn't tell anybody that. I would just have to let them have the thing in their tooth. I could never tell them that they're sitting here and smiling at me with a thing in their tooth. Like this is like consummate people pleasing. This is just, DEFCON 5 people pleasing. And I was one. I definitely had not shed that from my family of origin stuff. So again, for those of you who don't know, because I've shared this stuff in the past, but I come from alcoholic family system. And so there's like all these codependency patterns. And one of the most like virulent ones in my life is how I would describe it was always my job to make sure there wasn't conflict in the house, or at least there wasn't conflict for my younger siblings and I. So when there was an inevitable conflict because you weren't sure what kind of parent you were going to get or what kind of, arguments our parents would have been in or whatever, I was the one that kind of like made sure that we were out of the way, made sure that things were taken care of. And even more than that, I started to get really super good at making sure there never even erupted a conflict because I would keep everything under control, right? I would keep everything in line. I like you guys, I started doing hamburger helper dinners. Again, I'm aging myself, but I started doing those when I was like 8 years old by myself at home, making that. When I was that same age, I was packing the lunches for me and my younger siblings. It's like from the get-go, my whole job was to be sure that my parents had nothing to be upset by, that we were always doing and being and at the places we needed to be. And that's where I started learning this. And even 9 years ago, I was still deep in being a real strong people pleaser. And what I know to be true is if you're always avoiding conflict, you're in the background. People pleasers, one of the reasons they get so resentful, and they do get resentful because they're doing all these things and nobody sees it and nobody's giving them any validation for it at all. But one of the reasons they find themselves in that position is you make yourself part of the background. You aren't standing out. That is actually why you're doing the people pleasing. You are avoiding any kind of novelty or conflict. I mean, you think of things like novelty as conflict. You're not making a wave. You're not saying things. None of that is going to happen. You are just people pleasing. And inevitably, what will happen is people don't recall you because your job was for them not to recall you. What? Dr. Natalie, are you kidding me right now? And I know there are some of you out here listening to this podcast, like, fireworks going off in your brain. Like you have put it together. Oh my goodness, that's exactly what happens to me. I'm a people pleaser. And listen, most women are acculturated as caregivers to be people pleasers and to, as much as they possibly can, not create any conflict and make sure that everything runs smoothly. Does this sound familiar? Yes. So, most of us have some version of this. Not all of us have it at a, DEFCON 5 level that I did coming out of, the trauma situation of living in an alcoholic family home, which it is a trauma situation. And even though I'd done work, I mean, I was knee deep in being a psychologist and doing my own work and my own therapy, still had not laid down the people pleasing rod or whatever I was holding up. Clearly, because when I run into this couple just a little while ago, they couldn't remember me. They could remember my son. They could even remember his stepdad that came with me some of the time to the games. And his stepdad was a real, friendly guy. My second ex-husband, real friendly guy, always talking to everybody, always chumming it up, making new friends everywhere he went, right? Like that was one of his really great qualities. And mine was to be in the background, was to literally be a wallflower. Like I didn't want to make a ruckus of any kind. That for me felt like a threat. That for me felt like conflict, and it felt like a threat. So I just made myself in the background. And so much, I did it so well, people, that almost a decade later, this couple could not place me, even though I had been at every single game that entire season with them. Now I'll give them, I mean, they're midlife too. And so I'll give them some credit that it's 10 years ago, but they remembered my son and they did remember my ex. And so clearly it isn't that they didn't have some memory issue. Like they were remembering things and they were specifically not remembering me, which means I did my people pleasing job the way it was supposed to be done. And I made myself obsolete. And this, my friends, is one of the things that is causing the relationship difficulties for women in midlife. If you've been a people pleaser this way, you've coasted for a long time without it getting uncomfortable yet. It's actually worked for you at this developmental stages that you're in, raising kids, being, early in your career, zealous, trying to work up the ladder, being in your community, making sure to, make a name for yourself in some capacity. One of the ways women do that, or they think that they do that they're acculturated to do that, is to say yes to everything and bring the brownies when they're needed and take kids, to the places they need to go when somebody doesn't, so you can carpool, whatever. This is what we do. And we do it and don't realize that part of what that is an avoidance of conflict when it's at these levels of people pleasing, to the level of, I don't want to be noticed. I don't want to cause a ruckus. I don't want to create conflict. So if I'm doing my people pleasing well, nobody even asks if I'm here. Everything goes off without a hitch. And that's what I do. So I realize now in hindsight that this definitely was the thing that was happening when I ran into this couple. But what I also know to be true is that for women, when these relationships that I talked about earlier, your parents are aging, it's going from a relational, just loving and caring for one another and, having an attachment to these people. It's turning from that to more transactional. I mean, it's not like you don't have a relationship with them, but there's a lot more transactional stuff happening. And what transactional stuff is just that it's those caretaking things. Parents that need help getting all the stuff out of their house. They want to downsize. Parents needing help into assisted living. Parents needing help into higher levels of care, having to make decisions when, one parent dies and another one is still living, having to caretake an older generation is moving from that relational relationship into a transactional relationship. And simultaneously, the relationship with your children is turning from a transactional relationship where you did all the things, the brownies, the carpools, the games, all the things, right? You're moving from that into a more of if you're doing it correctly with your young adult children, if you want to do it healthily, you're moving into a relational relationship, meaning I'm not going to make those decisions for you, but I am 100% your biggest fan. And right here, when you fall, I will help. If you ask me for help, I am there, but I am not going to transactionally insert myself and tell you how to do things anymore, because that is not what you need from me at this stage in your life. You need to figure this stuff out. I've given you lots of tools. You probably do know how to do this, but you're going to have to learn in vivo how to get that going. So that relationship moving from transactional to relational. Well, here's the thing about people pleasing. People pleasing is really wrapped around which of those two styles you're doing. You can be a people pleaser relationally and transactionally, but they look very different in both of those categories. So transactionally, what it looks like is you over anticipate and you make sure that things are taken care of before anybody has even realized that there was something to be taken care of. You are 5 steps ahead of everybody. Now, when kids are young and we're all in the car and so forgot his socks and we're on a trip and so forgot his skates and we're going to hockey and we needed those brownies, but nobody was going to bring anything and you just happen to have some extra stuff in the car, that's amazing. Your people pleasing powers really work well in that transactional world. When you have a 24-year-old who's graduated from college and hasn't been able to find a place of their own in a job that can support them living in a place on their own, moved into your basement, and you want to help them preemptively finding jobs for them or talking to them about what you think they should be doing or sharing with them financial, forecasting, not useful unless they've actually asked for that help from you. But that's a relational interchange. When somebody comes to you and says, I need help, could you help me with this? Yes, I love you. I'm your biggest fan. But a parent that transactionally people pleased their young ones, when they have young adults, if they start showing up transactionally, it feels icky to those young adults. Young adults will say things like, you don't believe in me. I don't think you believe in me. I don't think you understand where I'm coming from. I don't think you trust that I'm going to be able to do this on my own. And that's what they need from you. They need trust. They need you to be their biggest fan. They need you relationally, right? And so if your people pleasing skill set is transactional with them, it's going to fall flat. And the other is true as well. So if you're people pleasing relationally with your mother, or how about this, your mother-in-law, right? You're people pleasing with them is, I'm just going to let her believe that her ham is the best every time that we have it. She always makes ham and none of us like it, but we're all going to eat it because we're going to relationally people please this woman. We only have to come and see her twice a year. So it's ham twice a year. Everybody suck it up. If that's your people pleasing with that older generation, and now you need to start making concrete transactional decisions for them, like where are they going to live in assisted living or should they be living in assisted living? And they don't want to be living in assisted living. Now that people pleasing of doing what they want isn't going to work. You actually have to show up transactionally and make a decision for them even when it's hard. And you're not used to pleasing them in that way or over anticipating and getting them what they need that way. So it gets kind of clunky, right? And here is where you're stuck in the middle, literally in middle age. Women struggle in these relationships because the way you've interfaced up until this point is most likely not going to work for you from this point forward. And that is what the shift has to be. I'm not saying that everybody is a people pleaser to the point of it being problematic, but many are. I've seen many a woman struggle with that. And I know all of us are people pleasers to some extent because societally and culturally, that's what we've been trained to do. And when we hit midlife and the relationships change and they feel like they change overnight, fast, on all sides of us, which there's truth to that. All of a sudden our superpowers aren't working anymore. In fact, they might be causing harm in relationships. And the stress of all that is just encroaching on us. So to go back to what I enticed you with as we came into this podcast. So Dr. Natalie, what's the one silver bullet then that's going to help us with this thing? Well, my friends, I want you to understand that what I'm going to tell you is the foundation to several different kinds of tools relationally that you might use. But if you don't have this foundation, that silver bullet, that foundation is super important, then the other tools you try to use aren't going to work so well. So what is it? It's boundaries. I know, I can just see all of you listening in your cars and on your walks. You're like, dang it, stamp therapist is going to say boundaries again. What the heck? Well, let me explain myself. Let's back up. Do you know what boundaries really are? right? Like, I really don't think that people pleasers that have been acculturated to be people pleasers know what boundaries are. We think of boundaries as that thing that is conflict. We think that when I say no to something, people are going to lose their minds. And so we've learned actually to fear setting up any boundaries. Listen, people, that was by design. If they kept us chasing our tails in our people pleasing lives, then nobody else had to pick up the slack, and we were doing all the things, and we were doing them so well in the background and preventatively, so nobody even knew, or like anticipatory getting things done, so people didn't even know they had something that needed to get done. Like, we do it well, nobody notices us. That's the reward of it, is nobody sees you, and 10 years later, 9 years later, they don't remember you. Okay, so when you are trying to change this, remember that you have some pretty backwards ways that you've been taught what boundaries really are. So let me talk to you about what clinically, from a psychologist's perspective, what a boundary really is. I'm actually going to use a quote from Prentice Hemphill. And she is a mental health professional, a researcher on this subject, on this area of boundaries, among other things, really about empowerment for people on intersectional levels. So women of color, and the fact that there's sexism and there's pay scale differences and all the things. Okay. But Prentice says this: boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously. That's the sweet spot, my friends. So I want you to think about, when you are people pleasing, do you respect yourself? Or do you find yourself caught up in some of these things where you've said yes to too many things and don't know how to say no, and back out of things and you're burning out? I know you do, just because I've been in this field for long enough to know that's a pretty common occurrence. I've also been a woman for 47 years. Like, I know it's a pretty common occurrence. We're doing the best we know how. We're people pleasing because that's what we've been taught and we've gotten rewarded for in some capacity. But at some point, we overstep the boundary of being able to love ourselves the same amount as we're loving the people we're saying yes to. And this is where resentment builds, because there's no awareness that we're doing all of that. If we're doing it well, we're in the background. People don't notice that we're giving so much of ourselves. They're not giving us any credit for how much we're giving. And so we don't like them, or we don't like us, right? There's one way or the other. Either you're going to start to be really resentful and not love them, or you're going to start to not really like yourself and not really think very much of yourself because you just keep saying yes to all the things. Do you hear what I'm saying? So the premise of boundaries is really quite simple. It's coming to that middle place where everybody is benefiting from what is happening. And no only comes up when not everybody would be benefiting to what's happening. When it becomes unequally yoked, then you say no, right? So when it's the, PTA meeting on top of all the other things that you're doing in your life, when they ask you to come and you're like, I literally don't have an hour a month. That's legitimately the case. I do not have an hour a month. If I give you that hour, I'm taking it from me, or I'm taking it from some other obligation that I have, because I don't really I have nothing left to give. So something will have to slip off. But here's the thing about how we show up to this, is that no one's ever thinking that something's going to fall off. We just keep deluding ourselves into believing, if I keep saying yes, I'll just come up with some more energy. I don't know. Like, I'll just come up with some more time. Right? So we're not thinking about that. And when we're not intentional about what comes off our plate, then our plate is deciding for us what's coming off the plate. And it usually comes off in some sort of spectacular fashion where you feel crummy at the end of it. It's like you forgot to get the costume ready and it's Halloween in 2 days, or you forgot to, show up to some meeting that you had. I mean, I've done it. I've not shown up to things. I've forgotten things. My kids have not been happy with me. My clients have not been happy with me. My significant others have not been happy with me when I've said yes, 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 yes so many times that something got lost in that shuffle. So saying no is not a confrontation. Saying no is the balance keeper. Saying no is just saying, I at this level can love you and me equally and simultaneously. But if I say yes to something that you're asking of me, I'm saying no to something for myself or another obligation that I have. And that is unequally yoked, and it's going to build resentment, or I'll stop loving you as much, or just feeling worthless yourself, like feeling like you're not enough, not good enough because you can't keep up with it all. And this is literally what it comes down to. So I know it doesn't sound like a really fancy, sexy silver bullet, but I promise you that premise is everything else is based on that. You can go and, do the John Gottman and his research is on married couples and the 4 horsemen. There's like 4 different negative things that couples do that are strong predictors, like 90% strong predictors that marriages or relationships, significant relationships, will fail. But all the things they're going to teach you to do are on top of a premise that you are boundaried enough that you're only saying yes as long as you can simultaneously love yourself and love the other person equally and simultaneously loving them. So I'm telling you, it really is kind of a silver bullet. And it will be a huge strength of yours if you can start to build the capacity to have boundaries in this way. And I know that boundaries, you can't just flip them on. It is an actual skill. And more than being an actual skill, it has other skills that feed into it. So, in my course rooms, I talk about self-awareness skills and self-compassion skills. Compassionate self-awareness of what you're doing when you're doing it is essential. If you don't know that you're unequally yoked, you don't know. You don't know that you're not loving you and the other person simultaneously. You don't know that the scales are off. So there are skills under skills as well. And if boundaries is a place that you're vulnerable, I would tell you, book now with me for your half-hour one-on-one session. Let's assess where the strengths and weaknesses are, and let me give you some ideas of what you need to do. This is literally no obligation. This is just a 30-minute free session to you. If you're curious at all, go to the notes today and click on the link to meet with me for that 30-minute session. And let's figure this out for you, because I'd really love to help more women figure out where this people-pleasing machine that we've been taught to be is going to fall down on itself in midlife and beyond, because relationships are changing and this style won't work for you anymore. And that's just the way the cookie crumbles, my friend. So let's stay compassionately self-aware out there, all right? And let's learn to love our stories. Let's be sure that we are taking care of ourselves in an equal, simultaneous way as we are taking care of the others in our life. And if we keep that balance, wow, then we can love our stories. I promise. Remember to like and share these podcasts with anybody that you think could hear this, could use this. There's a lot of yes, 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 yesers, people pleasers out there. So any of the people pleasers in your life, women or not, anybody could benefit from hearing what I just told them. I mean, what I've told all of you. You need to figure out how to have that balance. So please like and share all of the podcasts in March, because they're all going to be coming at some of these major areas. Next week, we're going to focus in on one of the areas that I love the most, and that is career and finance. It is a pivotal place for women in midlife. It's just a pivotal place, period, for all of us, the way Western culture is set up, but it's really pivotal for women. And there's a reason why in midlife we start to get super uncomfortable. Some of them are obvious, some of them are not. Like, there is unequal pay and things of that nature systemically that are not working in our favor. But really, there's a bigger thing that underlies this, and that's a sense of security. And so we're going to get at that in next week's podcast. So be sure to come back and listen to what resiliency factors I suggest you have around that.